And you've told me you've done chiropractic, acupuncture, taken medication, you've seen multiple doctors, done this, and this, but you're still suffering pain. So what have you done to try and correct the underlying? And the person will stop and go, what do you mean? No one's ever used that word correct. They've only ever focused on relief. This is why within the health profession, we've got to recognize who is actually focusing on the underlying dysfunction and rectifying that, restoring function, and who is there to make you feel better by relieving it.
Welcome to Beyond the Pain, the podcast that explores what it really takes to break free from chronic pain and reclaim your life. I'm your host, Lee Brandon, and someone who's spent over 2 decades helping people get to the root cause of pain that no one else could explain. Whether you're dealing with long-term back issues, joint pain, nerve discomfort, or mysterious symptoms that just won't go away, this show is here to help you go deeper. Because beyond the pain, there's clarity, strength, and power waiting for you. Each week, we'll uncover the physical, emotional, biochemical, and energetic causes of pain and how to transform them. Let's dive deep into this week's episode. In this episode of Beyond the Pain, I sit down with chiropractor Jason Gilbert for a powerful conversation about what pain really is, how to uncover its true root causes, and how to eliminate it through a truly holistic approach. We explore why taking responsibility for your actions and being willing to make the necessary and sometimes challenging lifestyle changes is essential to alleviating pain and reclaiming your quality of life. Now, just a quick note, Jason's internet connection wasn't the most stable during our chat, so the audio and video fade a little at times, and I did need to cut out some parts of this episode. But the insights he shares are absolutely worth staying with, and I will look forward to welcoming him back on the show in the future for a clearer and deeper conversation. Enjoy. Jason Gilbert, welcome to Beyond the Pain. It's great to have you on the show.
Lee Brandon, thank you very much. It's been an honor to be here and chat with you, mate.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. So to kick things off, so I know that you grew up surfing, running, playing rugby, which is, for the American listeners, it's a real man's sport. And, dealing with back pain from a young age as well. What did discovering chiropractic at age 17 change for you? And how did that shape your life and your career?
Yeah, great question, mate. I actually started feeling pain around 7 years of age. So because I was so young and it would come on after running, I was a long distance runner, I would play rugby or surfing. Because it was always associated with those sports, I actually thought it was normal. Like a bit like being hungry before you eat. Because after it, I'd feel pain and a certain amount of time would pass and I'd wake up the next day and I'd forget about the pain again. So obviously at that young age, I hadn't any idea that pain was a normal reflex. Yeah, and it was trying to advise me there were already problems that I found out later on. I'm sure we'll talk about as well now. But at 17 years of age, let's say 17, 18, I had a few things happen. We owned a health food store, my family, and I worked there on the weekends, which is incredible because I was always coming in contact with really interesting people, especially interesting elderly people. And I was fascinated by what their tricks were to keep them healthy at that ripe old age. And in all of that, I guess I complained of back pain when I saw a person come in and he was telling me about his experience with chiropractic. And I was like, wow, this is interesting. He said, what are you studying? And I was studying science. He said, what are you going to do in a Bachelor of Science? I just went to the chiropractor. I hobbled in there. 5 minutes later, I'm pain free. I'm like, this is incredible. What do you mean? Like, how's this work? That was one of the first things. And that coincided with an ex-world champion, Tom Carroll, surf champion, 3 times world champion, telling me to go to a chiropractor because I had this back pain. So, in life, sometimes nothing's a coincidence. And a couple of these things happen within the same week. So I went to a chiropractor, had great results, and then I decided to, enroll for chiropractic school. What I would say though, and we'll talk about that as well, is that I later learned that the relief I felt was actually a Band-Aid. even though that was from chiropractic. It could have been from physio, osteo, acupuncture. If it was focused to pain, which it was, obviously the dysfunction was still deep rooted and been there for a long time. And that would manifest again later on. That's pain.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's, I try and get across to people. There's two ways of looking at pain. Do you want it to be treated or do you want to cure? There's two very different things. One is passive, one is active, right?
Definitely right, mate. Over the years, I've actually said to people when they've come in for treatments, I said, look, chiropractic is incredible. It's changed my life. I'm sure it can change yours. However, if you're treating, if you're using it for pain relief, it's a very expensive aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a challenge, people get used to associating lack of health with symptoms. They don't think about the process they go through before the symptoms actually appear. So look at my case, that was years. And even at a young age, decades. And most people, when they feel relief, there's nothing reminding them to keep diving deeper and find what causes the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've said many times on the podcast before, pain is a message. It's a signal generally warning you of something that you need to address, right? Whether it's to do with your structure of your body, your posture, whether it's foods that you're eating, whether it's an emotional issue you've not dealt with, it really is a gift. There's a great book called The Gift of Pain, and pain really is a gift. And I guess the challenge a lot of people have is understanding what the message is. And that's why people come to people like us, so we can help interpret the message, and really push them in the right direction to, kind of alleviating whatever that message is trying to tell them.
Most definitely, you and I are speaking the same language, and I think everyone's got their process, even as practitioners and health professionals. We go through our process to realize, if this is a normal, natural reflex from the brain, calling my attention to an area of dysfunction, and I'm only suppressing the pain signal and leaving the cause, that doesn't make sense. And, I can remind my clients that, let's say that their body was showing that they had lung cancer and they found out because they actually sped up blood. No one would treat that like any successful intervention, an intervention as success, if it was only focused at suppressing the blood. They're obviously going to root cause. So when people understand that it's actually a reflex, it's similar to hunger, guiding you to eat. It's similar to feeling tired, guiding you to sleep. This is guiding you to look for that underlying problem. And it's got to be unpleasant. Otherwise, I write about this in my book, actually, if it was a nice feeling like laughing or an orgasm, well, we'd want to be in pain all day. It has to be unpleasant. And it's funny, when I talk about the book, I wrote my first book it's called The Secret of the Healthy Spine. And I wrote this book first in Portuguese. And my whole thing at the start of this book of my career was that the pain can actually save your life. And so in Portuguese or Spanish, that translates beautifully to salvador. Okay, save your pain. And I was like, oh, what a great name for a book. The pain can save you. So it's a really challenging thing. You might be able to relate to that as well, Lee, where if we're dealing with a body, and I would say the body is too efficient sometimes at removing the painful stigma. So let's say someone's had a pathogenesis, a process occurring for a very long time, and the pain, as we know, in many circumstances, not only with spinal problems or biomechanical problems, appears often at the end of the process, for example, coughing up blood for late-stage lung cancer. Then what people need to understand also is that pain is often the first thing to improve when you start to work at biomechanical function, which, as I've said with people over the years, they come in and they're going, oh, this is amazing, you're incredible. That sciatic pain that I had for 10 years is gone. And I've only been here twice. And I'm like, of course I'm happy for them because they're not suffering anymore. But I'm like, I'm sorry, don't think you're healed. There's still a problem. And as practitioners, I think we have a responsibility to remind people, we don't heal you. It's your body that does the healing. What we're doing is removing blockages and allowing your body to heal. And then hopefully we'll probably talk more about that. But that's when the fun starts. But I really have most success with clients that take a little while to get their state back. Like the ones that come out of pain, get out of that painful state pretty fast. They're the ones that typically might disappear and then come back on their next price. And, like I remember my early career, I set up in Peru. That was the first place I worked. And I opened this clinic up and I thought that this, I'll go and I'll have lots of patients from day one. And I did it. In the first month, I might have been seeing 2 people a day. So I put out a press release and I offered to examine every Peruvian child's spine free. So I went from 0 to 60 really fast. And then it normalized about 40 people a day. So we have a physio team. I was a chiropractor. Around that time, it was absolutely incredible experience because I was getting people from all social classes, very poor Peruvians from the Andes, to the people living in Lima, their executives, sports people, and all this. And what I saw multiple times, people coming in with pretty strong sciatica or other pain like back pain, etc. And they showed me their MRIs, and I've seen a very mild protrusion, let's say, like a very mild disc degeneration. Great. I did what I thought I should be doing at that time, and they'd disappear. I'd forget about it as well. It's 40 people a day. Multiple times, 5 to 10 years later, the same person would come back. And they'd say, oh my God, you're incredible. You got me out of pain. You're like, by that time you realize, no, I didn't. Your body that actually took that pain too fast. I'm in pain again. We get an MRI or something's down and go, oh my God. The time that they went, that 5 or 10 years, no pain, their disc degeneration went from to an extreme hernia many times. And then you're saying, you know what? You're doing someone a disservice if you only focus on them. Or their other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, an analogy I often use, and not necessarily just for pain, but any kind of symptomology is, imagine driving along in your car and you get the engine warning light come up on the dashboard, right? And you take it to the car mechanic and he says, oh, here's a bit of black tape to put over the light. Now you can't see the light.
Yeah, exactly. I use
right. What's going to
It's fantastic.
Yeah, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to keep driving around your car and eventually things it's going to blow up, right?
Yeah.
It's going to come a point where you can't drive it anymore. And, with pain, it comes to the point, if you keep ignoring it or you keep masking it, it will get to the point where you won't be able to function at all.
Exactly. And different to the car, you can't buy a new motor.
Exactly.
And mate, isn't it funny? That same analogy, I became really good at using analogies because my Spanish was pretty basic, and then I went to Brazil and learned Portuguese and same thing. So I think over the years I had to find simple ways to explain to my clients what was going on. But how many times do people come in and you go through all of that, you explain it, and it's like they're looking at the exhaust and they're saying that the exhaust is black. You're like, I know, but it's not the problem. It's actually the problem with the motor. Or the car's vibrating or it's spluttering. You're like, I know, but it's so hard to get their attention from the pain, from the warning light to the actual dysfunction in the motor. And, that requires time. Yeah, I don't know if you've had this experience as well, but we're humans. So one turning point in my career was when I actually, in my first consultation, managed to deviate via a whole lot of questions, neuro-linguistical questions, deviate the person's attention from pain to the underlying cause. For example, if, I tell them straight up, people don't come here due to the pain itself. They come here due to the fact that pain is limiting them from doing things that are important in their lives. So in your case, how's it affecting your work? How's it affecting your sports? And how's it affecting your relationships? And you can note that down. And this is a really good tip for anyone listening who is a practitioner, because it gives you a way of coming back and measuring that a month later. It's not just simply saying, well, what's your pain right now? Oh, no, it's not that bad. Before it was really bad. That doesn't describe much. But in all of this process, having them understand that, hey, there's an underlying cause. And what's going to happen if you don't finally correct the underlying cause? That's one question. Another question I asked that is this. Okay, you've been suffering this pain 5 or 10 years. You would have heard this, Lee, countless times as well. And you've told me you've done chiropractic, acupuncture, taken medication, you've seen multiple doctors, done this, 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 and this, but you're still suffering pain. So what have you done to try and correct the underlying? And the person will stop and go, what do you mean? No one's ever used that word correct. They've only ever focused on relief. This is why within the health profession, we've got to recognize who is actually focusing on the underlying dysfunction and rectifying that, restoring function, and who is there to make you feel better by relieving it. And look, there's no criticism either way. It's just that we've got to be clear on our goals and who we work with to achieve those goals.
Yeah, what's interesting, I get around quite a bit and speak to a lot of people, and people know what I do, so they'll come up to me and they'll say, "Oh, Lee, I've got this problem. What do you recommend?" In that scenario, I don't know, because I've not investigated at any level why they've got that issue. And one example, a few months ago, I was at this tennis event, and someone I hadn't seen for a long time came up to me, and she said, "Oh, I've got arthritis in my hands. Like, what should I do?" Right? And I said, "Well, if you've got it in both hands, my guess is, without, delving any deeper, you've got some kind of systemic issue." And she said, what do you mean? And I said, "Well, if you're right-handed and it was just in your right hand, it might be something to do with what you do with your right hand. You play tennis, maybe it's to do with playing tennis." I said, "But the fact it's in your left hand as well suggests to me that's more of a systemic issue. What I would probably do is investigate the health of your gut, maybe run some tests, see if there's any, what we call leaky gut, might have some inflammation, that might be causing the arthritic condition in your hands. It might be something that you're eating." And as I'm talking, there was this, like, the blinds were just coming down. Like, what do you mean it might be something to do with what I eat? What do you mean I might have to change something? She just wanted me to say, "Oh, look, here's the magic pill," or, "Oh yes, let me do this to your hand and all the pain's going to be gone," And it is curious to me why people are kind of that mindset. And if she's listening to this and she knows I'm talking about her, this is probably 99% of people that I come across, and I'm sure it's no different for you. And I've thought long and hard about this, and I think this is important for the listeners to hear as well, is that I want to take a moment to share a story that really stuck with me, because it's about more than just pain. Catherine was once a fit, active runner, but after a back injury, she could barely get out of bed. The worst part, she couldn't even pick up her toddler without wincing in pain. She felt helpless, exhausted, and scared of what the future might look like. Together, we figured out the root of the problem. Just 5 weeks later, she was off painkillers, and within 10 weeks, she was jogging and lifting her son pain-free. If pain is stopping you from living the life you want, grab my free chronic pain breakthrough blueprint at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide. It'll show you the 7 reasons you might be stuck in pain and how to start moving forwards. I think as human beings, we love things that are familiar. We love habits. And when something is unfamiliar or it's breaking a habit, it makes us feel on edge. It makes us feel a little bit nervy. We're not comfortable. We're feeling it's something outside of our comfort zone. And what I try and get across to all of my clients is that if you want to achieve something amazing, you won't do that in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And if that amazing thing is getting back to, being able to be active, to play sport, maybe to do your gardening, to be able to pick up your toddler from the floor, to be able to go to work, be able to sleep at night, because, a lot of people tell me they can't sleep at night because of pain. right? And I say to them, imagine having 8 hours of sleep every night for at least a week. How would that feel? Oh, amazing, right? Well, okay, that's great. But what you're going to need to do is to go out your comfort zone, right? In your daily habits to be able to get that. Is that worth changing for? You know? So, that really backs up with what you were saying earlier. But I just think that people in pain, again, because I have this conversation so many times in a week, and I'm not even talking about clients, I'm just talking regular people that I bump into. And, because they know what I do, they ask me questions. And of course, outside of my normal work environment, it's very difficult for me to really get into the nitty gritty and help people. But as soon as I start to explain, okay, well, it's you that needs to change. It's not me that's going to fix you. It's just like this, say, like it's like a blind is coming down, you know, and they're kind of like a rabbit in the headlights. What do you mean I'm going to have to do this myself? You know, and that's, I guess, for people like us, it makes our job quite interesting because it's not just about rubbing the bit that hurts.
No,
It's about getting them into the right mindset to be ready to make the necessary change
yeah.
to lead the life that they want, that they can't at the moment because of the pain, because the pain is limiting what they can do. And again, that comes back to what you said at the beginning.
Mate, it's really encouraging hearing that, because sometimes when we work with this, we forget there's other people thinking the same way. And so what I wanted to add before was the fact that in a consultation situation, especially when you're dealing with biomechanical health function, that if someone, and I've seen this hundreds of times in my career, if someone has to recognize that there's an underlying problem that needs to be corrected, that requires an investment in time and money, financial as well. And this is another thing, depending where you live. In Australia and the UK, we have public health systems. So people are used to neglecting their health and having someone else pay for it. In reality, I say the word health, but it's not health they're paying for. It's disease, it's symptom suppression. At no point in our health system are we looking at true health. But this is nobody's fault. It's simply because I feel that word health should be divided into people who truly focus on health and those who focus on disease or symptoms. And then we know, okay, if you've lost your health, which is when most people think about their health, when they actually lose it to a certain degree, then they'll know, oh, okay, my house is on fire. I need to ring the fire brigade. You will not want to ring anybody other than the fire brigade that time. You won't ring a carpenter. Then if they're not around, you ring your neighbours to try and help you through this emergency with their hoses. Now, it's funny, the fire brigade doesn't come along and say, oh, we're going to help you rebuild. It's us that thinks the fire brigade does that because they're called the health profession. Yeah, when I'm referring to fire brigade, I'm referring to the medical profession, responsible, well-meaning professionals following a paradigm, an allopathic paradigm that's different. So this is the first observation I think is really important for people to understand. Break your health down into whether it's symptomatic due to lack of health or whether you're feeling great, but there could be underlying dysfunction. And more than likely there is. If your diet's not 10 out of 10, your exercise and movement's not 10 out of 10, I mean, we're living. One of the main causes or the principal cause of spinal dysfunction is gravity. We can't escape from it. We have to stick down, send text and all the rest. And mate, the other thing that I'd say in reference to what you're saying is that we're born with a health bank. Let's say we're born multi-millionaires. Thankfully, most of us are born with health. But no one's there at the start of our life to help us understand how to spend, how to invest. In reality, not at all. We just spend. So your client who you ran into at the tennis, like many, is just used to spending. Spend. But as you know, hey, if you want to save money and you want to increase your wealth, well, that requires discipline. That might not be easy if you have to refrain from doing other things that are fun. No, you'll be saving, or investing in something that might have a long-term return. Hey, that ain't fun. And that's pretty similar to health, when most people have never been taught how to actually invest in it. They keep spending. And that for some people, you have seen it in their 30s, they're poor already, they're bankrupt. While others could be 60 or 70. And when I deal with younger people, I'm like, you know what? It's a blessing it's early because you've got a chance where your body's still strong to turn it around. Now, even if they're 60 or 70, of course, they still have that ability. And I've dealt with that with my mum, who was diagnosed with late stage lung cancer. She was smoking. This is the other health for smoking 60 years. Of course, she was always going to have lung cancer, and she got a late stage. She's still alive, like, and I remind people, like, someone who's in their 90s and not necessarily very healthy, if they cut themselves, their body always has the ability to heal. Maybe not as fast as someone who's 10, 10 years of age. But if we believe in the inherent curative abilities of our body and remove the blockages and give it what it needs, it'll do the job. And that's exactly what you just said there around diet, sleep, mindset, exercise, the way you move. Are you moving too much? Are you moving correctly? Or are you not moving at all? And I get my clients to put these into 3 categories: emotional, physical, and chemical. And chemicals obviously diet. So in each of these categories, I want them to put a line down the middle of the page and put toxin, nutrient, and start to recognize what their toxins are. So if their toxin is too much alcohol, fatty alcohol, too much sugar, food with preservatives, processed food. If it's seed oils, at least they've got a way of identifying what they're choking. And many people also, when they realize that they need to get healthy, or even if that something comes up, they'll go straight to thinking about things they need to stop doing that they like. But this actually deters a lot, then you get up. As opposed to accepting, hey, some of those other healthy habits can continue for a while. Let's just introduce positive. Can you walk 20 minutes a day? Can you drink more water? Can you drink good quality? Could you take, let's say, good quality omega-3 stuff if there's inflammation? You know what I mean? Like introducing things as opposed to saying stop smoking, stop 3 coffees a day, stop drinking every night, and then slowly bring that process around. It's like changing the course of shit. It's going from Australia to North America. If you just change 1 degree in direction, it'll end up in South America. It won't end up in Los Angeles. It'll end up in somewhere like here or live.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, as I said, it's really encouraging to speak to someone like yourself who is on the same plane. But I can't say I always recognise it as clearly as what I do now. And the hardest thing sometimes for a lot of health professionals is packaging it in a way that their patients will understand and then guiding them along the way. Because think of a football team. No football coach ever says at the start of the season, hey, do this, and this. So-and-so, you're on the wing, you're doing this, da-da-da. Good luck. I hope to see you at final. They're there every single week, multiple times when we train it. Why would anyone expect any help in regards to their health to occur once and never again? We shouldn't expect that either. We should go our client's side along the journey and introducing each other to new ideas and everything else, as opposed to an allopathic system paradigm. It's 1 or 2 off visit. When they're not feeling good, take this, and if the symptoms go away, that's it. They're not encouraged to think about their health life.
Yeah, something you mentioned earlier was the spine. So why would you say, in your view, is back pain so common? And why do you feel so many people find it hard to treat? Let's take a moment for Connor's story, because if you've been sidelined by injuries that just won't go away, you'll relate. Connor was a dedicated tennis player struggling with multiple injuries, knee pain, shoulder issues, and a bad back. He couldn't play properly, and it was crushing his confidence on court. After we put a plan together, tailored to his needs, Connor was pain-free in just 7 weeks. His movement improved, his strength returned, and he hasn't looked back since. If you feel like injuries are getting in the way of doing what you love, download my chronic pain breakthrough blueprint at www.bodycheck.co.uk/free pain guide. You deserve to perform at your best without the setbacks.
Yeah. Okay. Good question. And, like I'm in my fourth decade of working my career now, working with this guy. So, and a younger professional would have kept this answer purely physical, biomechanical. And that would include things that I've seen, things that are in my book actually. Because for 5 years, I documented every pause my clients came in with. Okay. Once again, I'm using paper towel. Most of the time, it's pretty sitting down for too long, sitting down incorrectly, sitting down in support that's not giving the right support, for example, a lounge or a sofa instead of a nice ergonomic chair. Okay. Sleeping for 8 hours on a mattress that's too soft. Okay. Once again, depending on the position, sleeping, face down, head turned one way, all of this clinical. And they're all things that you can, I guess, join the dots on with your clients over the years. Training too hard, not going through an injury process and stabilizing the area before they go back and do heavy weights again, like skipping that. So perpetuating instability. Get my drift there, like, or an obvious impact, sporting trauma, fall, physical things, things that are going to, I guess, compromise the biomechanical function of our spine, of our machine. Yeah. Anyway, my work in particularly Sao Paulo, but also Lima in Peru, was with people, predominantly executives, people who spend hours every day in traffic, people with, 4 or 5 things, really important things to do in a day, but only permitted to do 2 or 3 because of the traffic. So stress is through the roof. People who didn't really prioritize health or even have access to healthy food. And so with time, I'd be working with people and find that, my goodness, their muscles are rigid, their spine's rigid. I'm not getting the results I want here. I'll go deeper. So I started to ask about their diet and particularly hydration. Oh yeah, wow, your muscles don't feel like they're hydrated and I can't get an adjustment. When you adjust and work with a lot of people, do soft tissue work on people, you get an idea of what normal is. And then you hear, I don't like water. I just drink fizzy drink. I don't like the taste of water. You're like, what? So bit by bit, your career takes a bit of a turn this way and you actually focus more on diet.
So when you were using that analogy with the cup and filling the cup up, in my work, we call that physiological load.
Yeah.
And, another term for physiological load is stress. We call it allostatic load. And then, like you were saying, as you increase the amount of stress on the body, you cross a threshold, and that's when you start to get symptomology. And again, that is something I visually explain to clients as well, and then explain to them, look, what we need to do, these are all your stresses that I can see you're experiencing right now. What we need to do, we need to reduce the stresses on each of these levels. And then I say, and the way we do that, and then I list out the things that they need to do to reduce the stresses on those levels. So I find that can be quite helpful for people to see the why. Why do I need to do that? Why do I need to perhaps eat less cake, eat less biscuits, drink less alcohol, perhaps stop smoking, maybe don't go to bed late every night, staying up late watching TV, etc., etc. It kind of gives people that path, but then again, it always has to come back to, okay, so is it worth giving up those things? Again, that's their comfort zone. Is it worth giving up those things if it means you can play sport, it means you can pick your kid up from the floor, that you can go to work, that you can get a good night's sleep, or whatever it might be? Again, it's their decision, and it's no real skin off my nose which way they want to go. Do they want to stay where they are? And a question I often ask clients is, imagine sometime in the future, hopefully quite a long time in the future, it's your funeral and you're looking down from above what is everyone going to be saying about you over that period of time from now to, whenever you pass? What are people going to be saying about you? Will they be saying, oh, wow, yeah, he didn't look after himself. He was always in pain. He never got back to playing the sport he loved to play. He couldn't really do much with his kids. He didn't really live a happy life. Or do you want to be able to people to say, oh yeah, he was in that situation and he managed to turn it around and he was able to get back to playing sport and playing with his kids and, and then played with his grandkids when they were born. And, I think sometimes people have got to take a big step back and have that helicopter view and say, is this really what I want for my life? And some people might. And it's like, okay, well, I'll support you in every way you can, but there's no point me taking money from you if you don't want to follow the advice that I'm going to give you that's going to help you get there.
Exactly. 100%. 100%. And then another thing is to add to that is just ask people, hey, how do you want to be living? What do you love doing? What do you love doing? I love being with my spouse. I love being with my kids, my grandkids, whatever it is. All right. I live in a surfing area. People love surfing here. They love playing footy, whatever it is. And that's important. If everyone listening now has said, what do I love doing? And how would that look like in 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years in the future if I couldn't do it? If pain, an avoidable pain or symptom that I have right now, my body's telling me I've got, manifested to the point where I couldn't practice that or I was in pain all the time. And once again, as we said before, how would that look if you couldn't sleep well? How would it look if you couldn't eat? My dad passed away 2 years ago of motor neuron disease. The signs neurologically were there a very long time before. And I'm not saying it was 6 beers a night, but he had 6 beers a night his whole life. We've got to understand if we introduce enough toxins and there's not enough nutrients, well, look, we don't know what can happen. We just know that the requirement for 100% cell function, is a sufficiency of nutrients that the body's genetically required to receive, and a minimum or zero of toxins that it cannot genetically receive. So you know what I mean? He couldn't eat. He actually couldn't eat for the last 5 years. So if you're having challenges, imagining this could happen to you, go and speak to people, dive deeper and learn about the evolution that people go through when they are sick and how they are limited. Because, hey, it can happen to anyone if they don't look after their health.
Yeah, absolutely. Just sticking with back pain, because I don't know about you, but it's certainly the most common pain condition I tend to see. For the listeners, what would you suggest is the best way to prevent back pain in everyday life?
Okay, so many things we could do, but move well when you move. And if you're not moving, move. Do it in a way that's kind to your structure. And then support your structure well when you're not moving. Okay, so let's say someone works sitting, they've got to sit down to eat, they've got to sit down to commute, they've got to lie down to sleep. That's a long time during our day that a body that was meant for movement is actually in a state without movement. So that means that we've got to be well supported at those times. Yeah. And secondly, when we are moving, first, if we're not, we really need to look at how important that is. All right. If we just go back to something simple, and if we can walk, I've had spinal surgery, okay, or 5S1, microdiscectomy. And that's when I learned firsthand, I was a bit of a, pretty full on exercise person going, oh no, if I'm not sweating and not suffering, I'm not gaining. Well, I've learned firsthand that walking is incredible, and that's the advice I've consistently given to people at certain stages. And I've gotten the feedback for the last 15 years as well in regards to just how good walking is. So go and walk. Most people equate exercise with going to the gym. If they don't like the gym, they won't go. So I just say, what do you like to do? What did you like to do way back when you used to exercise? And those two right there, mate, so important. As we've touched upon it as well, if we're recognizing that a muscle's between like 65 and 80% water, drink water. Drink good quality water. Make it a priority. Get up in the morning and hydrate, because we see so many symptoms from cramps to muscle aches to all sorts of other types of, I guess, indications that the muscle's not well hydrated. And it's such a simple solution. I'd like to also highlight that a lot of what we're talking about is simple. This isn't rocket science. I have a hyperbaric chamber that I work with. Hey, we're not mentioning expensive equipment. Even though it's incredible, we're going back to basics. Walk on uneven surfaces is another thing I've discovered recently. If you can get into nature and you feel comfortable, get the shoes off. Go and walk in uneven areas, just to keep that proprioceptive neurological function of our body with the brain, that relationship open. There's so many tips, mate, that I could give. And as I've mentioned, I wrote a book on it, and that was a book that, interestingly, the causes grew. I had the list to grow and grow and grow and grow. And then it got to a point where it didn't grow anymore. Like now and then I'd find a new problem in my early career and write it down. But most of us suffer from the same causes that cause back pain. If you ride a motorbike, and work in areas in the jungle in Peru, and people sort of bent over, and it wasn't a coincidence that a lot of them came in with, the problems at the base of their neck. Okay. Or, if they're sitting down, they're professional drivers and they're suffering from low back pain. Well, strategies are really important for each person, depending on their lifestyle, to be able to compensate for that.
Mm. What I find quite interesting, and I'm sure you've come across it as well, and this kind of comes, I think, generally from the kind of pain science field, is that they often suggest that there's no link between posture and pain. Right?
Yeah.
Well, have you come across that? And if so, what do you think about that? Hi, everyone. Now, I have something new in the works that I'm really excited about. I know that not everyone can access or afford my one-to-one coaching, even though it can be life-changing. That's why I'm putting together a simple online group program designed to make my support more accessible and affordable. The mission stays the same: to help as many people as possible take control of their pain and live a life without limitations. At this time, it'll be in a supported group environment with a clear step-by-step plan, a setting that can be both powerful and motivating. Right now, I'm just exploring interest, so if you think you'd like to be part of this, just email me at lee@beyondthepainpodcast.com or DM me with the word group, and I'll make sure you're the first to hear when it launches. Thank you so much. I can't wait to share more with you. Now, back to the show.
Now and then I'll make claims. I hate to even say make claims, but I'll just declare what I feel is the truth online. And I don't know if they're trolls or who they are. They just want to shoot you down. Say, where's the scientific research? You're like, just listen to your clients. Listen to anyone who's sat in a chair that's not giving them support. If they're slumped, this is where I see this. A good example. These young kids playing video games. Because this is a thing, they're spending hours slumped over. And it's no coincidence that, firstly, well before they even tell you where it's hurting, you can palpate, you can observe, and you observe the effect of the posture on a spine that was meant to have two curves going back, okay? Lordosis, let's say, some people refer to it as that, but I'd say the cervical and the lumbar curve, and one curve going forward, which is the mid-back curve, the dorsal curve. So those curves need to be maintained, not exaggerated. And if the dorsal curve exaggerates, let's say it's increased due to being in a poor posture when you're sitting, well, we'll often lose the neck curve. We'll get rectification of the cervical curve. So one example has people understand very clearly the effect of this. Compare a giraffe to a flamingo. A giraffe has no curve, no mobility. A flamingo has two curves, has 360 degrees of rotation. So well before people might go, oh, but that you can't prove that hurts. You're like, I can prove that your poor posture is compromising your spinal function. And I don't care about pain or symptoms. If great, good on you if you don't feel that yet. But I can guarantee you, if you're in a state of dysfunction, you will feel something one day, and hopefully before you have arthritis, disc degeneration, etc. You know, so yeah, for me, posture is the window to the spine.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it just frustrates me when I hear comments like that because it's going to mislead some people. I've heard people say things like, "Oh, you shouldn't go to someone like Lee and get a physical assessment. It's just a waste of money," right? But yet, I've been doing this kind of work 24 years, and when I first started out, that was all I was doing. I was assessing people's structure, their biomechanics. I was helping correct their posture and their biomechanics, and they were getting better, right? Now, obviously, as I've gone through my training and gained more experience, yes, then things like nutrition came in, lifestyle, stress, emotional trauma. Yeah, they can all play a part. But to say that, your posture, your structure doesn't play a role in pain, yes, of course. That if you MRI'd spines of people in their 40s and 50s, you're going to see degeneration, right? Doesn't mean everyone's going to be in pain, right? But it doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater and say there's absolutely no link whatsoever. I mean, everyone I've ever seen with a disc bulge has a flattened lumbar spine. Everyone that I've seen with a facet joint irritation has had an excessive lumbar spine, right?
Yeah.
So just on that alone, how can you say there's no link between
Yeah.
posture and pain, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The way that I look at it, and I'm sure you do as well, you look at everything. You look at someone's posture, you look at what they're eating, you look at what time they go to bed, you look at how much water they're consuming, right? You investigate whether there's any, emotional stress, any mental stress going on, right? But to say that there's no link is just, just frustrates me. That's all. And the fact that I've helped hundreds of people just by correcting their posture,
Yeah. And it's
So
gratifying because it's up to them. You're empowering them. So we're trying to break away from a system that is based on dependence.
yeah, I've got an interesting story to share on that aspect. So I'm going back probably 20 plus years. And I was working with a lady. I could see that her atlas was out of alignment. And I referred her to a nuclear chiropractor that was in London at the time. And I remember later that day, because I knew the day she was going to have this adjustment done. And later that day, she rang me and she said, "You won't believe this." I said, "What?" So I think if I remember right, she was in her early 30s. She said, "I haven't had a menstrual cycle since I was about 18. I said, "Yeah." She said, "It's back." So for about 16 years, let's say, she hadn't had a menstrual cycle. She gets her neck adjusted and bang, it's back.
Incredible, isn't it?
So again, it just shows, if your structure of your posture isn't optimal, it can affect literally anything in the body. And to say that, there's absolutely no link between posture and pain, it doesn't mean if you've got poor posture or if you've got physical damage, you will definitely experience pain. We're not saying that either. I know there was a study, Booz et al., many years ago, and they studied lots of adult discs. So they did MRIs of discs. I can't remember the age group of the adults. And they found that 76% of them had some level of disc derangement, but no pain at all.
I see that. Yeah.
Right. And then 96% of them that did have pain also had damaged discs. So what does that tell you? Well, just because you've got damaged discs doesn't mean you have pain. It might be that the other things that you're doing are keeping you out of pain, right? You're below that physiological load threshold, right? But it might also mean that if you're sitting too long, or maybe you're doing heavy squats in the gym with poor form, maybe one day, like happened to me, you might have quite severe disc herniation. So I had L4-5, L5-S1 disc herniations. Yeah, so, I know leading up to that disc bulge, I knew I was spending way too long seated. I was writing a book and I had a deadline to meet. I was spending way too much time seated. I was doing Bikram yoga at the time, which probably wasn't ideal for me. I'm naturally very immobile. You could call it stable as well. But to take my joints through ranges of motion that they couldn't really go through, probably didn't help with my discs. Maybe there were other reasons as well. Maybe there wasn't enough downtime in my diary. That's in the region of the second chakra. That's about rhythm and flow. Maybe there wasn't enough flow in my schedule at the time. So maybe that was something the pain was trying to tell me. But yeah, to say that there's no link is just, as you can tell, I get a bit of a bee in my bonnet about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. And I understand, because over the years, I've seen people make really consequential decisions based on an opinion, based on a dogma, based on nothing that's clinically proven. And then I was going to add also to your example about the woman who had a period after many years of that menstruation. That's happened multiple times in my career where a woman hasn't had a period. She may not have said that, but has come back and told me, or gotten pregnant because she thought she didn't need to worry about being cautious. And this is really important to understand. It's not that every single person in the world is going to find a solution to that if there's nothing from that. And if the cause is less nerve supply to a certain organ, an interfered nerve supply, and that's removed, well, then that can happen. So, there's so many things we deal with, and people go, oh, is it a miracle what you do, or this or that? Well, we don't take responsibility for the victories or the pain, because it's the body that does the healing. The allopathic one that focuses on that only, then success would be getting on top of their vertigo, or here, take this for a headache. However, what about the poor brainstem that continues being pulled by poor posture? Where does that come on in the long term? So over the years, there was a moment I had 4 clinics in Peru, 10 clinics in Brazil. And what I'd say to the chiros and physios who work for me was that they had a moral obligation to have their clients understand enough to make the right decision. Because if a person doesn't understand that, you can imagine where the path could go. That could lead to a lifetime of dependence, medication, and the existence of that underlying problem, as opposed to the person being informed and empowered to look after themselves and focus on the cause. Also dealing with someone, a health profession. So yeah, they're really important moments for anyone suffering pain or symptoms. This I guess instance we're talking about back pain, really go deep. We do not want to end up on the surgeon's table. I don't know whether you operated, mate. It sounds like you would. Mine was severe. Unfortunately, the body doesn't always tell us strong enough or in a way that stops us in our tracks to be able to take note. My warning after kite surfing for a week and not changing my base with huge torsion was glute pain and intolerable sciatic pain, 10 out of 10 pain. For 2 months, I was doing everything I could to get on top of, because my specialty in Brazil was helping people avoid surgery. I was in a very fortunate position to receive clients, patients from neurologists and orthopedic surgeons who'd, work with their clients, send them to physios and all, and tried lots of things, but had heard about my work and said, just try this. Because they'd often look at an MRI and they'd see that it wasn't a serious hernia, or that wasn't serious in regards to what their experience taught them. So I had this it was a blessing to be able to get these people and work with them and help literally hundreds over the 20 years I was in Latin America avoid surgery. However, I was humbled because my case was truly surgical. And that's why I say, thank God for modern medicine when we need it. Thank God the fire brigade's there to put that fire out when we need it. However, no fibrograms was by my side after surgery, guiding me towards how I'd rehab. And that's another thing I'd say. Anyone going through surgery, being through surgery, that probably relate to it, it's not within the paradigm. So you have to find physios, you have to find people like yourself, Lee, to be able to guide you through those stages of recuperation so that you're strong forever and you're not back on the surgeon's table before you know it.
So I guess I had a equally humbling experience because I'd been helping people overcome lumbar disc issues for 12 years when I had my issue. And, you know, one of my first emotions was embarrassment, right? Because the same things you do to heal that are the same things you do to prevent it. And so to go through that again, for me, you know, it was a very humbling experience, but it was a very educational experience because it's all well and good understanding the science, understanding what's written in textbooks. But when you go through that experience yourself, you learn probably just as much, if not more, than you did actually going through the training. Because, you know, you're sat there and you're in pain, the slightest bit of flexion in your spine, you get that sciatic pain shooting down your leg. And now you've got to put socks on.
Or sneeze.
Right? Yeah. Right. How'd you do that? Yeah, I'm actually thinking about it. Yeah, remembering now. So, yeah, sneezing was, you had to really kind of brace and, you know, because that, yeah. And even laughing would be painful.
You wouldn't want to be constipated either, right?
No. Luckily I didn't have that, but yeah. So talking about the spine, talking about disc herniations, in plain English, can you describe for the audience perhaps don't know what a herniation is, but also what is osteoarthritis?
Yeah.
And do either of them necessarily mean that you will have back pain?
Yeah, really good question. Tell me something to make this explanation. Does that, if I hold up there, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we've got here is a segment. There's a vertebra, one above, one below, and a disc in the middle. So you can see there, I'm trying to hold that as level as possible. You can imagine that there's a spine here that needs to be straight. So if we turn it this way, here we have the facet joints, the articulation, okay? And we have the nerve root right here between each disc. Now, can you imagine how challenging it is to go through our whole lives and not misalign this spine through all those things we've mentioned? Impacts, sporting impacts, falls, poor posture, you know, poor work practices, etc. So what I compare this to is like the wheels of a car. Now, those traumas and influences are like holes and bumps in the road. So therefore, it's very difficult to maintain the wheels of our car aligned, right? All right. Now, if the wheel's misaligned, we have a tire. So this disc, let's think in terms of a tire. If that wheel's misaligned, you can imagine with uneven forces on that, there's going to be more compression one side than the other. So what happens is, because the disc is around 60 to 80% water, with time, we get a dehydration of the disc, right? That means that water is leaving the disc due to uneven forces. Now, once again, when I explain this to people on an MRI, they've never had this explained by anyone. But it's basic. It's literally, hey, we just have to ask the right question. Why is it happening? So if I turn it like this, then we can see, okay, this is nice and healthy. These are the annular fibers around the disc, and they're all nice and intact. Now, as water dehydrates, and we can see that on an MRI because it loses its color from like a white to sort of shades of gray and then black. This is what we get. We get these annular fibers weakening. So I'm just going to put the normal one down now. We're going to get these fibers weakening. As they weaken, their ability to contain the nucleus is challenged. If the load continues, this is the whole thing about posture, the whole thing about not correcting it when we should, or only dealing with pain, well, this will continue, right? We can already see that this phase one of degeneration has lost this class, yeah? But look at this. Remember those nerve roots? Look at one here compared to the other one. There's slightly less room here. So let's look at that in this next one where we start here and we can see that nucleus has actually been able to migrate because these fibers, look at them, they're all open. When I say open, they've ruptured. It's like a ligament, ruptured, and that's allowed migration of the nucleus. So what a lot of people don't understand is that you can have a protrusion or a disc hernia that's asymptomatic, like you mentioned before, Lee, simply because it's not interfering with the transfer of messages from the brain to the body, okay, the neurological system. And look at this, this is a whopper of a hernia that's actually affecting this nerve root. Now, if you compare the height of that one to this one, you can see that it's lost a lot more water, dehydrated, and that's allowed further degeneration of the disc. Now, what's interesting, so I just defined protrusion and hernia. Now we're going to get in and say, well, why is there arthritis? Why is the deposition of calcium occurring? And this is an interesting strategy, okay? Many people have different ideas on this, but after those 20 years in Latin America, having everybody x-ray beforehand, and you could see a correlation between where they hurt or where their scoliosis was and what side of the spine was the concave side and where these osteophytes or bone spurs were occurring. So it's obvious that the body's depositing calcium to close movement down. The brain's really intelligent. It doesn't want you to compromise the neurological function of the body. And it'll do almost anything to stop you. In most cases, if you've had pain, that's number one. Crisis, number two. If you're in crisis and you've only focused on the crisis and the suppression of pain, hey, this is what you're ignoring. And unfortunately, the body, being intelligent, also goes, well, what's the point of causing this unpleasant signal? Because they're not taking it seriously anyway. They've got to get on with life. They've got to, serve family, work, kids, and all the rest. So anyway, this is how problems, like what the example I gave earlier on in my early career, that I'd see protrusions come back as pretty bad hernias. Yeah. But then if we're looking at arthritis, it's a very slow process. So to me, small osteophytes are a sign that there's an uneven load. It's been in a state of dysfunction for a long time. Very rarely will you get these osteophytes heading back towards the nerve root, which is actually my case right now. I've had surgery, whatever, through my work, maybe the fact that microdiscectomy is a newer procedure. It's lost more disc height and a really beautiful bone spurs like this. So certain things I'm doing at the moment are causing pain there. So once again, will I need surgery? Maybe, but at least I understand when and how and why. Okay. And then I'm just going to go to the next stage, stage 3 of degeneration. Look at these two, and you can see how this is like almost total loss of disc height, and those osteophytes have almost grown to the point when they're touching. So that's almost total fusion occurring there. Okay, once again, remember that easy analogy. Misaligned wheel will wear out the tire on that side faster. So, use this analogy earlier about arthritis. If that wheel's misaligned, why aren't all tires worn out if it's a full body systemic process? It's obviously degenerating in the area that's taking on the extra load. Guys, that's osteoarthritis. That's arthritis caused by biomechanical dysfunction. This isn't psoriatic arthritis. It's not rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, there's other causes behind that. But this is biomechanical, osteoarthritis.
Beautiful. Right, they're really, really good models. So if you're listening to this podcast, I'd suggest you jump onto Spotify or YouTube to make sure you watch that demonstration. That was great.
Mate, no, lucky though, just there in front of me. I didn't plan to have them there.
There you go.
You can pull a pelvis out of my hat. And you know what? Now that I've got the pelvis in my hand, imagine how easy it is to have an ankle injury, a fracture, a knee injury, congenital hip problem, that could put more weight on one side than the other. Can you imagine the loads, the uneven loads that happen here in the sacroiliac joint, and therefore L5S1 straight from start? And you mentioned that client who went and had her atlas adjusted. Well, if there's a pelvic tilt, the whole spine's compensated in some way. Think about the lower floors of a very tall building. If they're misaligned, it's the stories that floors are going to be even more affected.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And where can people find you online, and where can people buy your book?
Mate, they'll buy that online. The Secret to Help is fine. They'll find it on my website. I've got other courses there as well, jasongilbert.com.au. Got a great course for recovery after spinal surgery. A really great course on, it's called Stronger Every Day. It's in regards to all the stuff we've talked about, nutrition, physical, chemical, and emotional causes of pain. So it would help someone with the info they need to get better. And I'm really accessible, mate. If anyone wants to contact me on Instagram, Jason Gilbert Official. I reply to everyone and often guide people all around the world to people like yourself, okay, that I'm familiar with, and get them, focus on the course. In a world where it's so hard to find people that actually help you with your health.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like me, you probably don't have a Ferrari in your drive, right?
I've got the second-hand dual cab ute that I can the tiff and take down the beach.
Yeah, I mean, that's another whole rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, there's not a lot of money in actually helping people. There's a lot of money in keeping people sick, though, unfortunately.
Exactly. And that's a really good point. We choose this because I often say my currency is gratification. The gratification that we get by hearing an example like you mentioned before, the woman who didn't have a period all over here and have a period, or someone get pregnant, or someone who wasn't sleep 8 hours a night, someone who was walking, has just finished a fun run, or whatever it is, that is currency. And I think we're in a beautiful time in human history where the focus is coming off what you have, okay? But it's actually focused on what you give, I guess, what your purpose is, what you be instead of what you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really great conversation, and I'm kind of feeling that this is going to be an episode I'm going to share quite a lot with people that I meet in the street. I think this is going to be quite an eye opener for a lot of people out there. So I just want to thank you for your time, and just thank you for sharing your knowledge with the audience today.
Fantastic. I hope so, mate. I hope it really does help people's lives. And mate, congratulations, because if it wasn't for people like you, it'd only be one-on-one. It just scales it up to reach many more people one-on-one. So huge congrats to you. Thank you very much.
Same to you. So that's it from Jason and me for this week. But be sure to tune in, same time, same place, next week on Beyond the Pain. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pain. If this episode resonated, please follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone you know who's been struggling. And remember, pain is not permanent. With the right insight and support, you can turn it into power. Until next time, stay open, stay strong, and keep moving beyond the pain.